And off we go. Okay, so what we're gonna do today in that case is we're gonna set up a separate React project and do a little bit of work in there to sort of like set up a project that we can build over several different weeks of this course. The goal being we'll add a particular feature at least some of the weeks during the course, maybe not every single one, but a feature that relates to something that is being covered in either that week or the week before. So we get some practice understanding why we might want to do something and making decisions about like when should I actually incorporate this feature? How does it apply to an actual project? So the past two-ish sessions that I've done this, the project has ended up being sort of like a shopping application. I think we'll probably stick with that. I think it lends itself really well to having lots of different very well-known features that we can sort of tie into specific React components. So we'll probably do the same thing. We'll set up sort of just like a general like shopping platform that is like things you've seen many times before, and we'll see many times again in the future. And we'll just add some features to it when we learn some cool stuff. But for today, we'll just set it up, sort of tear it all down, and then maybe just put in some very basic elements that will help you for the first week or two of class. So I'm going to jump into things. I'm going to try and go slowly, but if I'm going too fast, feel free to stop me. If you have any questions, feel free to stop me. Definitely speak up or just drop a message in the chat and we can slow down at any point. With that being said, I'm going to jump into my terminal and I'm going to head over to my projects section. And we have a sandbox repository for just doing sort of scratch work. We're going to make a new one, npm create beat at latest, and we'll go through this dialog of options. Maybe we'll call this shopping app, and we'll make this a React project. We will not make this a TypeScript project, although we'll do that pretty late into this course. I think TypeScript is like the very last week of content, which I think it's really important. And so we'll definitely cover it at some point, but we're going to leave that for a ways in the future. Cool. So we have our project here. I'm going to jump into it and we can npm install and npm start to make this work. One other thing to note is that I will provide a link to this repository anytime that we make changes so that you can pick it up from wherever the last week we left off is. So feel free to follow along if you want to, but this week is not anything super exciting. So I will just give you the code that we end up with next week if we pick up on this again.
Yeah, I had a question because the book said to use npm start like you're doing, but there's no npm start in the newest JSON package.
Yeah, it looks like it's not part of Vite by default. So if you are like me and you have sort of muscle memory to run npm start, you just have to create your own script in here. So I can create a start script and just say npm run dev, and it's sort of like an alias where the real script is the dev script and then npm run start just runs the dev script instead. This is usually what I end up doing. Definitely we will write a lot more scripts as we start to make this project a little bit bigger. These scripts, like they give you some by default, but you should always feel free to add or subtract or modify these to suit whatever your project requires.
No, that's great because I didn't know that npm start was npm run dev.
That's what I'm turning it into. Start would usually be I want my application to like start running in the real environment where it is, or maybe you'd have like a script start prod and you have a script start dev, and they do different things depending on what environment you're running it in. So my dev environment would be where I'm running it with Vite, and then maybe like for my final application, I have like this build script. If I run npm run build, then what it does is it creates this like output directory with all of my compiled code. So just a word of warning, like React is not valid vanilla JavaScript. You can't just run it in your browser. Rather, we need to convert it into something that the browser can understand, which is HTML and vanilla JavaScript. And so it generates all this absolutely disgusting vanilla JavaScript that does all the same things that you are in React language making your application do. And so maybe my build script is, okay, well, I just want to actually open that index.html or like run a specific compiled JavaScript script. So I could do like node disk slash assets slash index cw0ssra.js. And so now if I npm run start prod, this is not going to work because the script is not like a regular JavaScripty thing, but yeah, so we can customize the scripts all we want. And I always usually have a start script just because it's muscle memory for me. So feel free to do the same thing. Long answer for a short question. Okay, so we got this, and we have all of our pieces of a vanilla JavaScript app. I'm gonna get rid of this build folder just so that it's one less thing in our project. We ran npm install to get the node modules together, and now we have our running application here.
You go back to work.
Yeah.
And if your doctor thinks it's okay, it'll be okay. But if he doesn't think it's okay, then he should write you another note. Because if you have like, if you just
okay. So we got this. First things first, we just got to get rid of all the old stuff that we don't want. I'm gonna get rid of this assets folder, which we don't need. We also don't really need this v.svg. These I think are referenced in your index.html. Yeah, so over here, we're saying that the icon at the top of our page up here, this Vite logo, is my vite.svg that I just got rid of. This was in my public folder. Maybe we can go and find another SVG icon to use here just for fun. One place that I usually go for SVGs is, oh, not SVN. That's very different. SVN is like an older version of Git that is less intuitive, in my opinion, in case you're curious. But there's lots of free SVGs here. Maybe we can make this like some sort of coding icon. Kind of like this one over here. Yeah, someone raised a hand. Go for it.
I just had a quick question. Just because you said like we can use a different thing besides Vite, so can you explain like what the purpose of Vite is?
Sure. So we need a way to run our React application in the browser without having to like build it over and over again. Again, React is not valid like vanilla JavaScript. It's like a specification, like .jsx files is something that React specifies that you are allowed to do with like this return statement and all of your stuff inside of here. And so we need a tool like Vite or Create React app to sort of like handle all of the pieces between us writing the code and getting it running in a browser in our development environment, which is where that dev script comes in. So we're using Vite to run sort of like a development server that gives us our React app when we go to a specific URL. And then similarly, we also need something to compile all of that React code and JSX into vanilla JavaScript and HTML that we can actually use in a real browser somewhere. And so it does both of those things. It's like a build tool for us to do all the hard work. And there's a lot of things happening behind the scenes. It pulls in a lot of different dependencies. Babel is one that you might hear pretty often in reference to like build tools. Another one that you might hear that I don't know if Vite uses at all is Webpack. I don't see anything about Webpack in here. I think Webpack maybe is more useful for Create React App. But Create React App is like an older version of another build tool that has scripts that you can run that will execute your code without compiling it and also compile your code into that vanilla HTML, CSS, and JavaScript so that you can run it somewhere. And the goal of Vite is just to like do all of this without you having to set anything up, because trying to set up all of these different tools historically was a nightmare. And that's why Create React App was invented, so that it will just template everything out for you. If you want to plug and play stuff, you can, but for the most part, you shouldn't have to think about it. It should just work, and you should be able to focus on the code that you're writing.
Yeah, I heard it was created by like Mark Zuckerberg, by Meta.
Yeah, I think React is like a Meta / Facebook invention. I don't know where Create React App comes from necessarily. There's probably an interesting history that I'm not fully aware of that would be worth looking at. I don't know if this is officially like Meta. Oh, it's also from Facebook. Yeah, you might notice, I don't know if we've fully removed it from the updated version of our curriculum, but you may notice references to Create React App either in the videos or in the textbook, or in the curriculum somewhere. Like, feel free to discard those and just sort of like plug and play Vite wherever you see Create React App. It's a more modern tool that is just less headache, in my opinion, and it's also much faster. It's the other good thing.
What was the name of the website? SVG repo?
SVG repo. I'm realizing that I searched for an SVG and then I didn't actually do anything with it. Oh, no, it's there. It's in my downloads folder. So I'm gonna plug and play a new icon. We'll stick this in our public folder. We'll rename it on or tab icon, maybe. Hopefully we'll see, yeah, our icon updated up in the corner there. Great. All right, and then there's a bunch of other stuff that we can tear out. For instance, all of this CSS and index.css. I don't really know what it all does, and so I'm not inclined to keep it. We'll keep it around just so that we can add stylings to the whole page if we want to, but for the most part, I'm just going to pull all of this stuff out that comes with the basic project that we don't need yet. Ooh, here's another thing that I see every once in a while. You may notice that in either older pieces of code or in things that are templated, people will have like import React, or I don't remember exactly what the syntax is here. Maybe it's import. Okay, I don't think I have the right syntax.
Are you talking about import React from React?
Yeah, I think, is this the right syntax?
No, I can put it in the chat. It's import React, capital RECAT, no quotes. Give me a second. I'm putting it in the chat. Yeah, I put in the chat. It's import capital RECT from
okay.
Quote React.
Gotcha. So I was putting it in these curly braces here, which
yeah, you don't put in the curly brace.
Yeah. So you may see that a lot of people will have this like import big React here, and then instead of importing things that come from the React library, they'll like declare a new piece of state that says like my state my state updater equals react.use state. We haven't talked about state. I think that's not next week, but the week after, or maybe it's next week. I don't remember. But this is another thing to be aware of. We don't need to do this. If you're doing this anywhere, I encourage you to take it out. We can just import directly. Can someone tell me what the difference is between these two imports here? Why do I put one in curly braces but not the other? Does anyone know off the top of their heads?
It is component and is it is function.
So this one's a function and this is not a function. That's why we put in curly braces.
Yeah.
It's a good guess. Not quite exactly correct. Any other guesses? Yeah. I think Reza's got it here. React is a default export. So
Is it a hook?
this is a hook use state, but even that doesn't matter. What matters here is the way that we export from a file. So if I want a function or an object or anything to be available to another file in my project, I need to export it. So right now I am importing this app component from app.jsx. If I were to take out this export, now it's going to give me a red squiggle that says app is defined but never used anywhere. And if I go into my main.jsx, it actually does let me do this, but I think if I tried to run this code, it would not work. Let's see, I'm curious if it even lets me do it or if it's going to screen. Yeah, okay. So it says there's no matching export in this file for what we're trying to import here. So there's two ways I can export things. I can export something as the default export, which is what we were doing for this React component here. Let's take this out and just make a dummy. So this is just some component that currently doesn't do anything. Take out all the stuff that doesn't matter. So by default, when you create a new component, for the most part, you'll be exporting as the default. The default means if I don't specify a specific thing that I want to import inside of curly braces, whatever the default export is going to be is this thing over here. So my default export is this app component. And so I can call this whatever I want. I can call it app. I can call it my app. I can call it the app. I can call it foo bar. And JavaScript knows that because I'm not importing a specific named thing inside of curly braces, that it's just my default export. So you can mismatch the names here if you want to. For the most part, I don't think there's any great reason to do that. But usually if you only have like one thing that you're exporting, you'll export a default thing. Or maybe you have a component plus a couple of other things you want to export. Well, maybe the component is your default export. And then everything else that is not a component that you want to export has to be a named export. So maybe I have like a function here, foo bar, and we return foo, or we'll just call this foo. Then we'll call this bar, return bar. And maybe we have a JavaScript class here, foo bar. And this has a constructor that does a thing, this dot foo equal to foo. We're not really going to cover JavaScript classes very much in this course just because they're not super useful to React. But this is just like a way that we can do object-oriented programming. If that's something you're interested in, definitely worth looking up. But if I want to be able to export all of these things, I can only export one thing as the default. And so I can export instead specific items as named exports. So foo bar and foo bar are all things that I can export. And so now from this app.jsx, let's say I want to use
Do the functions have to be capitalized?
I don't think so. There's a language that I use at work called Golang where capitalized things are publicly exported and like lowercase things are not. Like there's no explicit export statement. It's just if you make something capital, then it's available to other packages. But I don't think JavaScript should do that. I'm not 100% sure. I think this is just like a React thing saying that I'm not exporting like JavaScript components or React components. Like these are just regular functions. I don't really know what this is about. We're going to mostly ignore this. But let's say I want to use all of these things. I can call foo, call bar. I can create a new foo bar. And you'll notice that all these things get imported in curly braces because they are named exports. I can only import them under the name at which they are exported. So that's the difference. Just something to be aware of if you're exporting a lot of different things. Like if you have maybe like a file that's just a bunch of utility functions, then you want to export them probably as named exports. But for React components, usually like components should be in their own file with their own helper functions that no one else cares about. And so just that component is the thing you're trying to export. But good to be aware of both. All right. That was a bunch of stuff. Let's get to the fun part. Let's make a component here. Oh, another question. Go for it.
My question is regarding, you're making lots of components. What's the best practices? Because after a while, the left side of my, the sidebar is going to be like vomit. So for every component I make, should I wrap it in a folder? Because the component's going to have the TSX or the JSX file and a CSS. So app.css is going to have a app.jsx is going to have app.csx. And then if you make a new component called, say, a search box or whatever, or, certain new component, then that's going to have the CSS, right? So should you wrap them all in folders so all your components are together? Otherwise, you're going to have like 8 files in your source, that are all running loose.
I would definitely advocate for some level of organization. The way you want to organize is totally up to you. Personally, what I would probably lean towards is sort of like separating at the top level by this is like a page that I can go to in my application versus these are some components. And then inside of here, maybe I separate my components into like a specific domain, like maybe these are components that are related to searching and these are components related to my display. Or maybe you do that at the high level. So maybe inside of your source folder, you say, well, I want to group everything that's related to my like homepage, and then maybe I have stuff that's related to like search, and I have some other stuff that's related to maybe sign in or authentication. And so you kind of like start grouping stuff more by functionality, and then maybe you have your page and components that go in that page. It's totally up to you how you want to organize. If you want to put every component and related CSS file together in their own folder, that's totally fine. I've seen that a lot. If you sort of have a folder for these are related components and you just name the CSS files to match the component that they go with, then like at some point you're still going to have enough organization. You're going to be able to always associate those two things are together. And so maybe putting them all in separate folders isn't 100% necessary. Up to you. Lots of people are going to have opinions about this. I don't have a good opinion. Whatever makes sense.
And how about passes? I see in the project you use relative passes. I read in the big system use it absolute path and use some additional libraries for manage these passes?
Yeah, so like a relative and an absolute file path. I don't recall using absolute paths like for imports up here. I think like for React, for the most part, you're always going to use like relative paths to say, I'm going to import from my current directory, or right now I'm in the source folder, so maybe I want to go up one level and I want to import something from one folder level higher. But for the most part, it's only going to be accessing files inside of your current project. And so a relative path generally makes sense. An absolute path, like if I am on my own computer here and I'm in my home directory right now, so this is /users/Eli, I can say, well, list everything in my current directory, which is all these different folders, or list everything at /users/Eli. Absolute path doesn't matter where I am currently. You just give it an absolute location, which I personally don't use that in the context of React. It's more useful like in a file system sort of environment.
Yeah, I'm lazy. I just hover over what I want and then I right click and then you can copy the relative path and then paste that.
That also works. I can count on my fingers the number of times where I've had to like manually import something, which is very, very little. For the most part, like your IDE will just do it for you if you start typing the thing you want. If I know that I want my app component, and I can just say, give me an app, and it knows what the relative import is and can do that for me. And if it doesn't do that, then maybe there's something wrong. You should go figure that out. All right, let's do a couple things here, maybe. Let's create maybe a location for data. And let's create just like some dummy data that we can use to populate our page. So we're going to create a shopping platform. We have to be able to display a bunch of products that people can buy. So we'll create a products array, dummy products, equal to an array of some things. And we'll export down here just to keep it a little more clear. And we can just throw in some data here that we're going to use. You're going to do this for your project. You're going to create just like some to-dos with an ID and do something. You're just going to create a bunch of dummy data like this to fill in your application until we eventually create a form in maybe week 3 or 4. So you can input your own data. We're going to do the same thing here, but we're going to do it a little more complex. If I am creating a product that I'm going to sell to someone on a shopping platform, what properties should a product have? Or what properties do we need to represent for any products in
You need to have a description, price, maybe like a picture.
all good options. Maybe we'll call this like a float to indicate it's a number that has a decimal. I think someone else was going to say something as well. I heard another voice.
ID.
An ID, absolutely. We need to be able to say, this is the specific item that I want to do something to.
Product group.
Yeah, maybe we have like a group. Maybe like this fits into like clothing, or this fits into activewear or something like that. Could be a good option.
Maybe like a quantity.
Yeah, we'll definitely need to be able to in the future say, like I want to buy 2 or 3 of these. Actually, maybe what we could do is we could say like how many are available. So I can only provide 3 of these items, and once people buy 3 of them, then it's gone. So maybe we have like a number available that can change, which is kind of like a quantity. I don't know if that's exactly what you're thinking of. I'm gonna say maybe we throw in like a name for the product to go along with the description. I think it probably needs to belong to somebody. So maybe a seller, which we'll just model as a string right now. In the future, for something like this, probably what you would have is you would have a data model for a product and a data model for users of your application. And you want to say this user object is the seller of this product. And so maybe we'd have a user that has like a first name and a last name and an ID and a bunch of other fields down here. And you would say, my seller ID is an integer. And we call this like a foreign key relationship in that we have like a unique identifier of a different data model that we associate this data with. So this product belongs to the seller with this ID. But for now, we're going to keep it as a string just to make things simple so we don't have to do that extra data modeling. An image. Yes, I like that. I think a couple people mentioned that and I totally forgot. Maybe we want to have an image that we can link to. Another thing that I've thrown in here before is maybe like a discount, like what percentage is this discounted? So maybe this can be an integer between 0 and 99.
Can you put reviews?
We could do reviews. That would also probably be something that we would want to model in like a different data type. So maybe I have like a collection of products. Maybe I'm using like SQL where we put all of our data into a table.
Or you can just put stars.
Tables. Even like ratings like that, I would not probably put as part of this data model because that information is going to be like an aggregate of a lot of other data. So probably I would have like a review type. And every time someone leaves a review for a product, we create our own review data that says my product that is reviewed is this integer. My reviewer is this integer. And if I want to get the rating or the number of stars for this product, then I would probably go do some math and say, get all of my reviews where my product ID is equal to 3. And then I just do a little bit of math myself and say, sum them all and divide by 5. And this would be our rating from 0 to 5 stars, something like that. So also a great consideration and something we would definitely want on our platform, but I'm going to leave this out for now just so that we don't have any like extra data models hanging around, just for simplicity. All right, I see one more question. A date.
I might have a question that would not like directly correspond with the today's lesson, but just to learn maybe from you about what you think about it. So in online shops, there is quite often the fact that, I don't know, you can order something, but then somebody else orders, and therefore you have this broken quantity. Sometimes the site shows that it has something left, and then it turns out that actually in the warehouse they do not. So in terms of basically making a site in general, right? How can you avoid this as much as possible?
This is a good question. I can think of it like a number of ways that something like this might happen, but usually it's because your data is being interacted with by multiple people at the same time. So, like maybe I pull up a page on my screen that says I have one of these items left. And I'm thinking about it for a while, have it open my browser tab that I never close, and it's just sitting there waiting for me to buy it. And in that time, someone actually comes and buys it, and my screen is still showing that it has one. My local website still thinks that it has one. And then by the time I actually go and try and buy it, it tries to like send a request to the server to say, yeah, give this item to this person, but it's not there anymore. And so the server's going to send back a response that says, dude, what are you doing? That doesn't work. And so that might be one case where sort of like the UI is misleading just because something has already happened, because someone else was taking an action. And usually like there's not a whole lot you can do about that other than make sure you write your server code really well, such that anytime you run into an error condition where someone's trying to buy something that they can't because it doesn't exist or because it has zero quantity, like we got to take all that into account when we're writing our code on the server side and on the front end side as well.
Well,
Another
usually
thing-
when you go to the checkout, it'll tell you like, oh, in this time, the carrots you ordered is gone.
Yeah, that's another great option. Yeah, again, like that data is on your computer, it just becomes outdated, and by the time you go and fetch that data again, it's different. And so that's something that you as the developer need to be able to handle and be aware of. Other things that could happen, like it could just be an accounting error, like maybe someone like sold something and there was someone in the warehouse that's supposed to like hit a button that sets the quantity down to 0, but you actually, it still thinks that you have one internally in the system. It's not really anything you, the developer, can do, like other than just have fail safes in place for sending out that apology email of, we're so sorry, we accidentally messed up, can we give you your money back or something like that. Another thing that happens sometimes that can be really nasty is something called a race condition. A race condition is where two different processes are competing over some resource, and depending on the sequence of events in which they interact with that resource, you might end up with a different result. This can be really nasty because it's usually like hard to find and hard to really pin down why certain things are happening. You just sort of have to like be good at spotting them and identifying that if this condition exists, maybe we'd get into this state or maybe we'd get into this other state. This like is more common when you're creating an application that is running multiple different processes at the same time. It's called multi-threading. We're not going to do anything like that in a React app, so like don't worry about that from a front end perspective. Sometimes things like that will even happen if two people are sending the same request at the same time to the server. So maybe two people at the exact same time hit the button that says, I want to buy a product, and someone else at the same time hits a button that says, like, I want to like change this product and do something else to it. And so depending on which event we get first, there might be a different interaction on the server. And so really it's just about being careful that you're handling errors properly to make sure that everything is still going to be okay. Does that like kind of answer the question?
Yes, it definitely does. Though I was maybe referring more to what John answered in the chat. It's like I wasn't really. Maybe I phrased the question incorrectly. I was thinking more about not why it may happen, but about how we can program it so that like the potential user never runs into into such a problem.
Well, you can refresh it when they hit the checkout.
Yeah, like in the end, it really is just about making sure that you're handling any potential cases that would cause problems. So like this is something we got to be thinking about when we're implementing features. How could this possibly go wrong? if multiple people are using this at the same time, or if we're gonna like run into an error condition. So as a developer, I might need to know, well, maybe my product is going to be gone by the time I actually check out. And so I need to be able to handle that properly. John's sort of like answering down here one way that we can avoid sort of race conditions or like multiple processes competing for the same thing, where we have like this concept of like a lock, which is to say, I am going to take ownership of this item and no one else can do anything to it until I'm finished. Which is one way of making sure that two people don't try and like edit the same item at the same time, and then we have like an unexpected result in the end. If we know that lots of different people can do the same thing at the same time with the same item, then maybe we give ownership of the item for a very small period of time to the first person, and then once they're finished, then we transfer ownership to the second person. The second person just has to wait, and hopefully it'll be really quick. That's another option. That's probably a little overkill for what we'd be doing like on a React side of things, but maybe like a version of that could definitely, also be a good option for something.
Well, Amazon Fresh does it because sometimes I take, 2 hours to grocery shop. So when I hit the shopping cart, Amazon will be like, oh, we're out of carrots, we're out of the lettuce. It was available like 2 hours previously, but you took too long to shop. So.
Yeah. So maybe that would be like going
So
in.
it refreshes your quantity on when you click on the shopping cart or when you click on like, when you're in the last couple steps when you're ready to pay.
Yeah, also a good option. Lots of ways of doing things, just depends on your problem.
Yep. Thank you so much.
Yeah. All right, let's create some dummy products in here really quick. I'm not going to put in all these fields. Maybe we'll leave this for another day, or I'll just do it offline, but it's not super important. For now, let's create maybe like 3 products.
Is that what you call a data dump?
We call this dummy just because like it's just a thing that exists that like is not particularly special in any way, and we're just hard coding everything. Like a crash test dummy, we can do whatever we want with it. We can abuse all of this data. It just fills in for the real data that we're going to eventually have in the future. All right, so this product has a name. Maybe we'll call this really cool lamp. And a description. What can I say? It's
Sounds like a lamp you see on Urban Outfitters.
yeah, any kind of cool lamp. Maybe we have a price that says this is $100. And we have a discount, which is that it's 20% off. And
Will it be 0.20 since it's gonna be times, right?
we could represent it as 0.20 if we want to. I would generally say that a discount is not going to be a fraction of a percent. And so I would rather represent this as a whole number. Computers are much better about representing whole numbers than they are fractional numbers. A good thing to read up on is floating point numbers. Basically, like if we have a decimal, there's only so many decimal digits that we are able to represent before we just kind of have to approximate. Just because of like the amount of space that we are allowed to store a number in cannot represent certain decimals. So if I actually, let's do this.
Well, you can just use round when you do your thing. You can just use .round when you do your JS.
Maybe like it might work, but I'd rather be as exact as possible here. But like if I were to do like 5.00075 or 723 times 9.12345, like this is a crazy number here. I don't actually know if this is correct or not. Are these equal? No, not quite. All right. So again, this is not exactly right. Google thinks it's something different than we think over here. And I would rather not use decimals if I don't have to. And so I'm going to use a whole number just so that like we can avoid decimals as much as possible. The price here is still going to have some decimals in it. That's kind of unavoidable. We could probably do some math here and say, well, to get my actual discounted price, let's do my price times 100 to get rid of this decimal and make it a whole number, which is much easier to represent. And then let's do our discount. I don't know. We could do this math a lot of different ways, but I'm going to leave it as a whole number. Long story short. And then our seller can be Eli. And our image, let's go find an image of a lamp. This one's pretty cool. It's gonna be really long, isn't it? Oh, it's not too bad. All right, now let's create one more really cool chair. Maybe this one will be $350. And this one will not be discounted, and I'm also selling this. Really cool chair. These are pretty cool. They're glowing. Let's get this. All right, and let's see if we can display this really quick in app.jsx. Let my data equal my dummy products, which will import, and then for, actually, let's do this differently. So one thing you're gonna do, I don't know if this was part of the first assignment or the next one, is we're gonna do a dot map call on your array of items. Dot map is a function that takes every item in your array and turns it into a different item according to a specific mapping function. And then you get back the new array of items. And so what we're going to do is we're going to map all of these JavaScript objects into React components that we can put into this output. So let's say we return a div. And then inside of this div, we're going to map our product to a React thing. I'm not going to make it a list item. Make it another div.
Do you have an extra div on line 12?
I think this one's supposed to go with this one. I think I'm missing
Oh, okay.
a couple of parentheses and brackets, perhaps. Okay, that looks better. This is telling me that it's empty. Oh no, that I don't have a key. A reminder that a key is really important for any time that you're going to map to a list of items. It needs to know, React needs to know what order they were in the previous render so that if it's in the same order, it doesn't have to redo them. And so we use a key to indicate, to let React know what order your elements were in. And so a key needs to be unique. And so we'll make this my product.id. And then in here, maybe we have like a p element for our product title. And we have a p element for product.description.
Would it be a UL and a LI?
We could do that if we want to. A list item creates like a bullet, like a bulleted list or a like numbered list, which is not really what we want. I really just want like a bunch of boxes that we can style in the future that have a bunch of content inside of them. So I am personally not going to make this a list item, but you're more than welcome to make it a UL and an LI here if that is what you would like to do. Make this the price, and we'll show an image with the source equal to product.image. And let's see if this works. So we have our app component, we are exporting this app. And if we go into our main.jsx, we are using this app here. Nice. We got our products. Doesn't look great yet, but we have our description, we have our price, and we have our image here. Did I not put the name in here? Oh, should be name, not title. There we go. All right. So we have our first React component for this project. Right now, it just throws some data in a box. And maybe next week we'll take this component and sort of separate it out and sort of flesh things out, add a little bit of CSS to make it look prettier. And we'll continue adding some functionality here. But this is as far as I wanted to get today. We had plenty of side tangents. All right. Questions, comments, concerns. I see one question in the Zoom chat. If an item doesn't have a unique ID property, what is a practical approach for creating a unique key? Well, your unique key has to be something that can only be for that product. In this particular data model, I would not say anything else here can be a unique key because all of these things could be duplicate of any other product. You would think, I don't know, maybe the name is good enough. But we could have like multiple really cool lamps sold by different people. We could have multiple things sold by the same person. So for the most part, any data that you have in a website is going to have some sort of unique identifier. Maybe the name of the product is the unique identifier, and so we don't need an ID. In this case, this data model doesn't really make sense, but something where maybe that does make sense is like if I have a username. So like if I have a user for my application, they have a first name, which is a string, and they have a last name, which is a string, and they have a username, which is also a string. Well, I probably will also give them an ID here, just because it's really helpful to have, but I don't need to. I could say my username is my unique identifier because I'm not going to allow two people to share the same username. And so in that case, maybe that's the key that you would use when you're going to go ahead and like map something out into a list. That's one approach to it. For the most part, I think IDs are going to be available everywhere. And if they're not, you should consider making them available because it's just a very practical way of doing things. Worst comes to worst, if you don't have any data that like literally has to be unique, like see if you can find a way to get something in there. Like if you don't have an ID property, maybe you need to create one, or maybe it exists, but you just don't have it locally. Maybe you got to change your API so that you get the ID back when you like send a request to your server that says, give me this product. And it like worst case scenario, you can maybe put some fields together that shouldn't overlap. So in my product here, it is unlikely that someone is going to create two products with the same name and description and in the same group. So maybe I could make like a composite key of those things and say my key is equal to my product dot name plus maybe some separator just to like really make it like unlikely that someone would just write this out. And then my product dot description, maybe we'll just do product dot group plus separator. product dot seller. Maybe this. And in theory, it is unlikely that the same person would list another product in the same group that would overlap with this key, but it's possible, and that's dangerous. And maybe you'd run into that case in the future. Yeah, John has another good suggestion here of maybe we don't take any data from this type and we just like use the date that we pulled that object from the server. So if I don't have an ID here, maybe like when I pull this data from the server, I use random identifier to new date. And in theory, the state will be very slightly different for everything in your list. Even that is not 100% correct. I would just advocate for using an identifier. Yeah, I think the suggestion down here is UUID. I don't know if there's like a native support for this in JavaScript, but that is just another way to generate an identifier. So maybe my ID is just a number that starts at 0, and as we create more and more products, we just add 1 every time. Maybe my ID is just like a unique identifier string, which is always like a fixed length and just has a bunch of random numbers and characters in it. And then the next time I generate a completely new random one. And we typically would call this a UUID or a UID, like a unique identifier. And so we could say, when I create a new product, I'm going to give it a random UUID instead of an ID here.
Like a hash.
Yeah, it's kind of like a hash in a way. Any other questions? We're over time, so I don't hold you guys too long.
Quick
All right.
question, Eli. Is this going to be recording and be available
Yeah.
soon?
I will post this. It goes under the CTD recordings dashboard, which I think is linked in one of the channels, but I will post a link when I like in the thread where my announcement was this morning, just to establish that precedent, and then in the future probably will not do that. But I will post this probably right after we jump off here, and we'll make it available.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And what tools you use for debugging?
Oh, that's a good question. My debugging knowledge is a little bit more limited in React than in the stuff that I do at work, but like the most easy way to debug things is just try to make data available. If I have a question about like why is something showing up empty, then maybe I'm just gonna log the object that I expect to have data and go check my console and say, well, is the data what I expect, or is there no data there? How did no data get there? And start sort of like digging through things. So certainly doing some console.logs or some print statements is a very viable way of doing things. You can also use your debugger tools in whatever IDE you use. I personally do not know how to set up a debugger for running a Vite project, but I'm sure there are 40 bajillion people on the internet that can help you out with that. But a debugger can let you say, I want you to stop when you execute this particular piece of code. And when you're running your application, it will literally pause your whole application when you reach a certain point, and it'll show you in your debugger all of the different data that you have available at that moment. Like, what are all the variables nearby? What is the result of calling these functions? And you can set these breakpoints throughout your code to say, I want to inspect what my application looks like at this moment. And
You
that's
can just do that in your browser.
You can do that from like your DevTools in your browser.
Yeah, like if you go to Q, oh yeah, and then you go to your code.
There's a lot of
Yeah,
JS.
and then I think if you press on a red dot, like how you did that, it'll run your code to a certain part. Oh, there should be a red dot.
Yeah. I don't
I
know.
think it does it in HTML, but maybe it doesn't do it in, well,
There's got to be
what
some way
browser
to
are you
set
in?
that.
I
I'm in Firefox right now. I'm not gonna take up any more time on this. If you're interested, which you probably should be, go read a Google article. I can send out a link with the recording and stuff if it's helpful. Being good with a debugger is a good skill to have for sure.
It does do it in your browser because
I'm sure that you could do it. They wouldn't have a debugger tab.
yeah, exactly. Thanks.
All right, I'm gonna sign off. I need to go eat some food because I haven't eaten any food yet. I will post a recording after this. Please make sure to fill out the sign-in form before you go if you haven't already, so I can mark you as here. And I will see you guys next week. Have a good weekend.
You too.
Thank you. Sorry for holding you a little too long. Have a nice evening.